What about the hints that there is some tension between King Charles and Prince William? I mean, yes. Prince William didn't want Andrew's daughters to be at the Christmas, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And Charles said, no, they're going. Is there any, from the things that you're hearing, from what you're reading, is there real tension between them?
Look, there could be. I thought this was a very interesting story which erupted over Christmas. So William did not want his cousins, Eugenie and Beatrice, to do the traditional Sandringham Christmas Day walk because he felt the spotlight would be on them, of course, and it would rake up all the Andrew adjacent controversy, and really that's radioactive for the royal family. They don't want it. And the girls had been, or the women rather, had been sort of largely low profile, which protected them. At the end of the day, they're still William's cousins and he still wants to be protective of them. So he had, according to this story, had discussed with his father that maybe that they should not be at the Sandringham Walk, but Charles overruled him. Again, he's the king. He does not like to be told what to do. And so they were there. But it did hint at a bit of a power struggle between the heir in waiting and the king himself, and we've been led to believe, of course, that any aggravation at the top of the Windsor tree has been largely Sussex related. But if it's more to do with William and his father...
What's been quietly unfolding behind palace walls over the Christmas period is far more revealing than the royal press would like to admit. It directly challenges one of the most carefully protected narratives of the last 5 years, the idea that every crack at the top of the House of Windsor leads straight back to the Sussexes. That storyline is suddenly wobbling because the tension people are now whispering about has nothing to do with Harry and Meghan at all. Instead, it's between King Charles and Prince William, and once you start pulling at that thread, the entire picture changes. Let's start with the moment that sparked this conversation, the Sandringham Christmas Day walk. On the surface, it looked routine, the usual choreography of smiles, waves and polite greetings. But behind the scenes, something very different was reportedly happening. According to multiple royal commentators, Prince William did not want Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie taking part in the public walk to church. His reasoning wasn't petty and it wasn't personal. It was strategic. William was concerned that the presence of Prince Andrew's daughters would drag the Andrew scandal back into public focus, at precisely the moment the palace is trying to bury it. Any appearance involving figures adjacent to Andrew, no matter how blameless those figures are personally, carries risk. Optics matter. Headlines matter. And William, unlike many before him, is deeply focused on optics. The thinking reportedly went like this. Beatrice and Eugenie have maintained relatively low profiles, and that discretion has protected them. Bringing them into the spotlight during the most photographed royal moment of the year could invite renewed scrutiny not of them, but of their father. In William's view, that association is radioactive. So William raised the issue with his father, not as a command, not as an act of rebellion, but as a discussion. And King Charles said no. Not just no, but absolutely not. Charles overruled him because Charles is still the king. And those who know him say he does not take kindly to being told what to do, particularly by his heir. That's where this stops being a family disagreement and starts looking like a power struggle, because this wasn't really about two cousins walking to church. It was about control of the monarchy's future image. What makes this moment so important is what it reveals. William and Charles do not share the same vision. William is focused on damage control, containment, modern optics, and ruthless streamlining. Charles, on the other hand, still sees the monarchy through a more traditional relational lens. Family loyalty matters to him. Inclusion matters. He resents being micromanaged, especially by someone who hasn't worn the crown yet. And this clash exposes something the palace has tried desperately to conceal. The aggravation at the top of the Windsor tree is not primarily Sussex-related. In fact, once commentators acknowledge that the real tension may be between William and his father, it completely dismantles the long-standing narrative that Harry and Meghan are the root cause of every royal headache. And this is where, intentionally or not, the Sussexes are quietly defended. For years, the story has gone like this. Harry leaves, Meghan speaks out, chaos follows, the family fractures, the institution destabilises. But now we're being told that even without Harry and Meghan in the room, there is serious disagreement at the very top. And that matters. It suggests the problems are structural, generational and ideological, not personal vendettas driven by the Sussex. According to those close to the situation, William has a very specific picture of what his future reign should look like. Leaner, tighter, more disciplined, less emotional, less messy. Charles, however, is still trying to balance monarchy with family, and he's finding that balance increasingly difficult as his son pushes efficiency over sentiment. That's not a Sussex problem. That's a succession problem, one that's been quietly brewing for years. What's fascinating is how this story slipped out at all. Normally, disagreements between Charles and William are buried, smoothed over and sanitised. But this one erupted publicly over Christmas, when unity is supposed to be the message. That alone tells you how significant the disagreement was. It also raises a bigger question. Who is really in control right now? William is the heir, but Charles is the monarch. William wants to shape the future, while Charles is guarding the present. When those two visions collide, sparks fly. This isn't the first time insiders have hinted at friction between them. We've heard whispers before about staffing decisions, media strategy, how aggressively to deal with Andrew, and how much distance to put between the monarchy and scandal. William wants decisive action, clean lines, and firm boundaries. Charles prefers negotiation, gradual shifts, and quiet management. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but they are fundamentally incompatible. What makes this especially ironic is how often William has been positioned as the stabilising force against the supposedly disruptive Sussexes. Yet here we are, watching William challenge his own father in a conflict that has nothing to do with Harry or Meghan. When commentators admit that even briefly it does something extraordinary. It humanises the Sussexes' position. Because if William can clash with Charles over Andrew's daughters, it becomes much harder to argue that Harry was unreasonable for clashing with Charles over his wife, his security, or his children. It reframes the entire conversation. It shows that this family struggles with power transitions, not just Sussex departures, and it highlights something rarely said out loud. William is not waiting patiently in the wings. He is already trying to shape the monarchy in his image. Charles knows it. That's why he bristled. That's why he overruled. That's why this moment matters. Succession anxiety is real, and it's showing. And again, none of this originates with Harry and Meghan. They're not even present yet. Tension exists anyway. That's the quiet truth this story reveals. The palace may want the public to believe that removing the Sussexes restored harmony, but the cracks are still there. They were always there. They predate Meghan. They predate Harry's departure. They're about control, legacy and power. That's why this Christmas story struck such a nerve. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Windsor family isn't divided because of one couple who left. It's divided because the crown itself creates conflict, especially when the reigning king and the future king don't see eye to eye. As this story circulates, the Sussexes are no longer the convenient scapegoat. Instead, they become evidence of a much bigger issue, one that hasn't been solved, only postponed. And if tensions between Charles and William continue to surface, it will become increasingly difficult for the palace to keep pointing across the Atlantic and pretending the problem lives there. This time, the tension is homegrown, sitting right at the top of the Windsor tree. But let's dig deeper into what this really means for the institution itself. What we're witnessing isn't just a father-son disagreement, it's a preview of what's coming. And the palace should be worried. William's approach, prioritising image over inclusion, efficiency over emotion, may play well in focus groups. It may look good on paper, but it comes with a cost. The more William distances the monarchy from its own family members, the more he risks making it look exactly like what critics have long claimed it is. Cold, calculating, and ruthlessly self-preserving. That's the contradiction at the heart of his strategy. He wants to modernise, he wants to streamline, he wants relevance, but you cannot build relevance on exclusion. You cannot market authenticity while ejecting anyone who complicates the narrative. Charles understands this, perhaps better than William gives him credit for. Charles knows the monarchy's survival has always depended on a delicate balance. Image matters, yes, but so does humanity. So does the appearance of family cohesion, even when it's messy behind closed doors. When you start publicly sidelining relatives, even well-intentioned ones like Beatrice and Eugenie, you send a message. And that message is that blood ties only matter when they're convenient. Ironically, that's exactly the criticism Harry and Meghan have been making all along. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for the palace. If William's vision wins, if the monarchy becomes a tightly controlled, emotionally sterile brand, what happens to the relatives who don't fit the aesthetic? The cousins, the extended family, the ones who aren't working royals but still carry the name. They become liabilities, loose ends, potential scandals waiting to happen. That's not sustainable. Eventually, the public will notice the pattern. They'll see that an institution claiming continuity and tradition is willing to discard its own when it suits the narrative. When that realization lands, the Sussexes won't look like the problem anymore. They'll look like the canary in the coal mine who saw this coming and left before they were pushed. That's the real danger for the palace right now. Not that Charles and William disagree, families disagree all the time, but that their disagreement exposes the fundamental flaw in William's approach. You cannot build a modern monarchy on medieval power dynamics. You cannot demand loyalty while offering conditional love. And you cannot blame Harry and Meghan for breaking a system that was already breaking itself. This Christmas incident, the clash over Beatrice and Eugenie, is a microcosm of a much larger crisis. And the palace knows it. That's why the story leaked. That's why insiders are talking. When cracks start showing at the very top, no amount of spin can paper over them. The institution is at a crossroads. And the two people who should be united in steering it forward are pulling in opposite directions. That's not a Sussex problem. That's a Windsor problem. And until the palace acknowledges that, nothing will truly change.